Okay, well, hi and welcome. I'm Diana Marsh. I'm an assistant professor of archives and digital curation at the University of Maryland's College of Information Studies, or iSchool. But today I'm opening this event in my capacity as this year's chair of the Native American Archives section of the Society of American Archivists, or SAA, and as a participant in this year's Archival Education Research Institute, or AERI. Today I'm beaming into you all from Washington, D.C., which is located on the ancestral territories of the Piscataway and 𝐀𝐻𝐿a and their indigenous kin and neighbors. And because I work at the University of Maryland as a land-grant university, I want to acknowledge the 202,000 acres of indigenous land taken and distributed to the university under the Morrill Act in 1862. I also want to note that Zoom is headquartered on the unceded lands of the 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐥𝐿 tribal nation. I recognize that I and all members of the University of Maryland community and all of us who use Zoom daily continue to benefit from the use and occupation of these lands. I want to acknowledge the separation that many acts of colonialism and assimilation, which included archival collecting and documentation, generated between indigenous peoples and their homelands. I further acknowledge the continued power and resilience of indigenous communities and nations, and celebrate the collaborative and decolonizing work now taking place in our collections and institutions. And today's panel speakers are here to talk about one very important project in that spirit. And I invite everyone else here to use the chat if you wish to post the lands that you are on now. Before we begin, I'd also like to make a few introductions, thanks, and shout outs. First, to my vice chair, Selena Ortega-Chalero, who has been an amazing co-pilot this year. Selena will begin as chair of the Native American Archives section in August. So Selena, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Willie Jan, hello everybody. As Diana mentioned, my name is Selena Ortega-Chalero. Museum Specialist 𝐀𝐛𝐬𝐭𝐫𝐚𝐜. I live and work on Métis Riverland, the ancestral homelands of the 𝐀𝐻𝐿a and Dena'ina Dene, where I'm currently the museum specialist for Chicxulub Village Traditional Council, the federal governing body of Chicxulub Native Village. I'm very excited that you all join us for today's program. I look forward to doing this work, and I invite you all to join us along this journey. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you. And thank you, Selena, for all of your amazing work this year and for taking the helm next. It's very exciting. In addition to Selena, I'd also like to thank Melissa Stoner and Lotus Norton-Wisla helping to moderate today's event, and to our whole Native American Archives section steering committee. We have an amazing group of members and volunteers who meet once a month and do an incredible amount of work there and offline to advance Native and Indigenous archival practice and the implementation of the protocols for Native American archival materials. We are running an ongoing case study series on implementing the protocols in institutions. You should consider writing one, and feel free to read them on our website. We also host free events like this one, which you can view after the fact on our website and on the Sustainable Heritage Network. There's lots more, and you can check out our website to hear about all of that. We're also holding elections for new steering committee members in the next 2 weeks. So for our members, don't forget to vote. And for those of you who aren't members, I hope you will consider joining us. Next, I want to thank the AERI Program Committee who offered to co-host and co-promote today's event. For those of you who don't know about AERI, it's a community of archival scholars, broadly defined to encompass folks in institutional and community settings, not just in academics, whose goal is to support inclusive and vibrant archival scholarship that enables all of us to remember and confront our pasts, hold power brokers to account, uplift communities, and address societal grand challenges. If you'd like to learn more about AERI, they've just approved new bylaws that describe their mission and makeup. AERI is also seeking members for its new steering committee, so check out the nomination form if you're interested in that. Lastly, I'd like to thank my home institution, the iSchool at UMD, for sponsoring today's event. Check out cool archival work and a speaker series during the academic year here as part of our Center for Archival Futures, or CAFE, as we affectionately call it. A lot of people made today happen, so thank you to you all. Now on to today's content. The reconciliation framework our speakers will be discussing today was launched in February and was a response to the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on Canada Taskforce, or TRC-TF, of the Steering Committee on Canada's Archives. Itself the result of over 5 years of SSHRC-funded research, relationship building, and collaboration between representatives of the Canadian archival community and Indigenous heritage practitioners. Today's discussion will feature 5 members of the task force who will describe their work on the framework and next steps in their efforts. Let me briefly introduce them, and please check our event page or the AERI program for their full bios. Erica Hernandez-Reed is head of the Northern BC Archives and Special Collections at the University of Northern British Columbia, co-chair of the response to the report of the TRC-TF of the Steering Committee on Canada's Archives, a member of the Indigenization Program Steering Committee, and current president of the Association of Canadian Archivists. Reagan Swanson serves as executive director of the Archives, Canada's LGBTQ2+ archives, and is currently working on her PhD, focusing on the role of community archives in Inuit communities in Quebec. Krista McCracken is researcher and curator at Algoma University's Arthur A. Wishart Library and Shingwauk Residential Schools Center. Jennifer Jansen works on the Tsawwassen First Nation as information management coordinator, FOIA officer, and clerk for the Judicial Council, as well as managing Tsawwassen First Nations Registry of Laws and acting as backup Indian Registry Administrator. Donald Johnson is the information management analyst and special media archivist at the Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan, co-chair of the response to the report of the TRC-TF of the Steering Committee on Canada's Archives, and a member of the Lytton First Nation. After their presentation, we are eager to have discussion about how we as archival and community colleagues across borders might work to advance ethical, respectful, and reciprocal Indigenous archival stewardship. And we'll moderate the chat and a Google Doc when we get to that point. So I'll turn the slides over to Erica and team.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you to the members of your NAS and to the SAA for this invitation. We are honored to be with you today. So on behalf of the members of my presentation team, I would like to start off today's presentation by offering a collective territorial acknowledgement which recognizes the Indigenous territories upon which we each live, work, and learn. So Donald Johnson is speaking from Regina, Saskatchewan, which is situated on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6. These are the territories of the 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐥𝐞, Anishinaapiq, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Mischief Nation. Today, these lands continue to be the shared territory of many diverse peoples from near and far. Jennifer Jansen is speaking from Tsawwassen lands, located at the mouth of the Fraser River and adjacent to the city of Delta. This area is the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and Semiahmoo First Nations. Reagan Swanson is speaking from Toronto, Ontario, situated on the traditional land of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. Krista McCracken is joining us from Wating, also known as Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory. This is the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe and Métis people, specifically Garden River and Batchewana First Nations, as well as the Métis people. And I am joining you from the land where the two rivers meet in Prince George, BC, on the traditional unceded territory of the Lheidli T'enneh Nation. I would also like to acknowledge all of the past and present members of our task force who have contributed in immeasurable ways towards the work we are presenting here today. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica Hernandez-Reed, and on behalf of my task force team, thank you for inviting us to speak with you today. I will begin today's presentation by contextualizing the work of the Steering Committee on Canada's Archives' response to the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Task Force, or TRC-TF for short. I'll provide a bit of insight into the research methodology used and objectives identified over the past 6 or so years of our mandate, and present the vision statement and 6 principles we identified and adhered to during our journey towards understanding the archival community's role in reconciliation with our country's Indigenous peoples. My task force teammates will then each present 7 objectives and several of the 33 strategies for implementation identified and articulated in our Living Reconciliation Framework. This all too brief introduction to the very heart of our work will then be wrapped up by a conclusion which will speak to the future of this living framework and to the work that still needs to be done to maintain its utility as a living document. In June 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada issued 94 calls to action to the Canadian government and its citizenry in hopes that all of those addressed in these calls would take heed and actively redress the wrongs they had done to the Indigenous peoples of Canada. The intended audience for call to action number 70 was the Canadian archival community, as it states, "We call upon the federal government to provide funding to the Canadian Association of Archivists to undertake, in collaboration with Aboriginal peoples, a national review of archival policies and best practices to 1. Determine the level of compliance with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the United Nations Joannet-Orlenture principles as related to Aboriginal peoples' inalienable right to know the truth about what happened and why with regards to human rights violations committed against them in the residential schools. 2. Produce a report with recommendations for full implementation of these international mechanisms as a reconciliation framework for Canadian archives." Now, you may have noticed the quote unquote Canadian Association of Archivists doesn't actually exist. This was a simple mistake made by the writers of this particular call to action. The intended addressee of this particular call to action was the Association of Canadian Archivists, or ACA. Regardless, the ACA did hear this call and understood the active role they had to play to fulfill this mandate. However, they also knew they couldn't and shouldn't embark on this work of national scope alone. And so they brought this mandate for action to the Steering Committee on Canada's Archives, or SCCA, which is a collaborative organization representing the Canadian Council of Archives, the Association of Canadian Archivists, Library and Archives Canada, l'Association des Archivistes du Québec, and the Council of Provincial and Territorial Archivists. Collectively, the SCCA established the response to the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Task Force, whose mandate was to conduct a review of archival policies and best practices existent across the country and identify potential barriers to reconciliation efforts between the Canadian archival community and Indigenous record keepers. With such a review in hand, the task force was then to work in collaboration with Indigenous communities to create an actionable response to this research, which would become the foundation for a reconciliation framework for Canadian archives. While our membership composition over the past 6 years has changed, as of January 2022, our task force was comprised of 14 non-Indigenous archivists and 10 Indigenous record keepers, librarians, archivists, curators, researchers, and oral history and culture coordinators. Together, task force members provided representation from almost every province and territory across Canada, as well as from Canada's 3 distinct groups of Indigenous peoples, the Métis, the Inuit, and the First Nations. I must state, however, that securing and retaining task force volunteers identifying as Inuit and Métis was an ongoing challenge, one that perhaps we can address in more detail in the Q&A section of this talk. Excuse me. With membership established and mandate in hand, the TRC-TF spent the past 6 years conducting a review of archival policies and best practices existent across the country and identifying potential barriers to reconciliation efforts between the Canadian archival community and Indigenous record keepers and researchers. The result of this 2017 bilingual exercise, the report on the results from the Survey on Reconciliation Action and Awareness in Canadian Archives, was published in June 2018 and is available on the SCCA website. From 2017, oh dear, sorry, my clicker is not working. There we go, okay. From 2017 to 2019, the task force then worked on an expanded literature review, which succeeded in gaining greater awareness of the variety of perspectives held by archivists and heritage professionals across Canada and around the world on the many facets of reconciliation work. Undertaken concurrently with this work was our Indigenous outreach research. through which 185 Indigenous organizations were contacted and 47 interviews undertaken. The information gathered from these insightful conversations was anonymized, vetted by the interviewees for accuracy, and further compiled into a draft master document titled Indigenous Outreach Summary Report. With all of this background research in hand, task force members then met for the first time in Vancouver in March 2019 at our Reconciliation Visioning Circle. Out of this intensive and emotional 3-day meeting came the following vision statement: 6 guiding principles, 7 objectives, and 33 strategies for implementation, which together form the foundational supports of our reconciliation framework. So our vision statement is guided by truth, reciprocity, and mutual respect. The Canadian archival community supports Indigenous peoples' sovereignty and self-determination by actively committing to its role and responsibility in building equitable relationships with Inuit, Métis, and First Nations communities. These relationships will respect and recognize Indigenous peoples' inherent and inalienable right to ownership and sovereignty over their records, recorded memory, knowledge, and information. The 6 principles which guided our work are as follows. 1. All Canadian archivists accept the responsibility of proactive, respectful engagement led by Indigenous community priorities. 2. The Canadian archival community acknowledges that this work requires sustained investments in human and financial resources. The equitable sharing of such resources is essential to building capacity in Indigenous and archival communities. 3. The Canadian archival community commits to and advocates for shifting institutional priorities to respond to the needs of Indigenous communities. 4. The Canadian archival community supports future generations by working collaboratively with elders and youth in the revitalization of Indigenous memory, knowledge, governance, and legal systems. 5. The Canadian archival community acknowledges that Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis are diverse, distinct, and sovereign nations. And 6. The Canadian archival community is committed to reconciliation and relationship building, guided by the principles of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the UN Joint-Orentlicher Principles, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. I'll now turn the floor over to Jennifer Jansen, who will introduce you to objectives 1 and 2.
Thanks, Erica. Objective 1 is developing relationships of respect, responsibility, relevance, and reciprocity. This first objective is meant or seen as a way to reset how we approach the relationship between archives and Indigenous communities, and to make it more of a collaborative partnership. This objective this objective is meant to provide a framework for all the other objectives, setting out where we want to go. Erica, if you could advance to the next one, thank you. So in order to move forward, we first need to acknowledge where we are and how we got here. And that means owning some truths that might be uncomfortable. So one of those is that the archival profession is itself a product of Western European colonizer worldview. Our job at its core is to preserve what gets written down. And so by definition, we are privileging the voices of those who are doing the writing. There are other ways of preserving and passing down knowledge, and those ways are still practiced today, but those voices have been marginalized. And in order to move forward on the path towards reconciliation, we need to change that. So the objects that we keep, whether these are written documents, photographs, recordings, or artifacts, can be deeply imbued with meaning for Indigenous communities in ways that those of us who are settlers can't fully understand or comprehend. And even if we only see a book or a letter, we must always be mindful of the power that these words, images, and sounds can have for the Indigenous people that they came from or are about, and we must treat them with the appropriate care and respect. Moving forward also requires that we change the way that things are done. So we have to learn about the true history of our country and our role in that history to give the work that we do context. We have to make room for new ways of thinking and for new perspectives to take the lead. And we must commit to long-term, ongoing, sustained efforts to create and build lasting partnerships. Next slide, please. So change can only come about by walking together in a true partnership. And this means letting go of the notion that as archivists, that we are the experts, quote unquote, and Indigenous communities are the clients. Our job at this point now is to listen, to really listen to what our Indigenous partners are telling us about their needs and their priorities and what they want to achieve. And we can then use our expertise and technical knowledge to find the best way to help deliver those outcomes. True partnership also means that both sides are benefiting. For too long, the relationship between archives and Indigenous communities has been primarily focused on extracting knowledge from Indigenous communities, where we seek their expertise and their input, but we don't provide a whole lot in return other than to say thank you. So we need to rethink these relationships with our Indigenous partners and ask ourselves not just what can we learn from them, but also how can we give back to them, and how can we provide support and contribute to the community. Next slide, please. So you'll have to click through. So where do we begin with these? So the first thing is to make an effort. So this means taking an initiative to reach out, to do some research, and to learn about the history, our history, and the communities that we serve. Number two, we need to ask. And this is how we learn who to talk to, what the protocols are, and where to begin. So no one is expected to be an expert on Indigenous protocol right from the beginning, but asking the question shows that you're aware that you need to learn and that you want to do things in a good way. Third, we need to follow the lead. That means making space for Indigenous partners to guide the way and trust them to know what their community's needs and priorities are. Fourth, being patient, because building trust takes time. Things will not go perfectly, and there will be mistakes, disagreements, and conflicting information along the way, and that's okay. We also need to be mindful that we are working on the community's timelines, that they may have more pressing needs to deal with and cannot necessarily respond in a timely way. But if you keep trying, then efforts will pay off. Number five, we need to adapt. So things like distance, internet access or lack of internet access, language, literacy, trauma related to institutional spaces, these things can all be barriers to connecting with an Indigenous community. So instead of asking people from those Indigenous communities to work through those barriers, we as archivists should be asking ourselves what we can do to reduce or remove those obstacles and make materials and information more accessible. Number six is to keep showing up, and this is how we build trust. By continuing to show up, we are showing that we are committed to being there, not just for the duration of a project, but for the long term. And number seven, by far, the most important thing we can do is listen. To check ourselves that we are listening to learn and not to respond. Sometimes it means we have to listen to things that are uncomfortable and can mean that we are taking the brunt of people's anger and pain or being told that we're not welcome. And it is vital that we hear and take in those messages, because working through those hard lessons is the only way we can move forward. It's important to remember it's not about perfection, it's about doing better. Any step taken towards doing better, no matter how small, is worth doing. Next slide, please. So objective number 2 is governance and management structures. The Canadian archival communities leaders shall ensure that their organizational culture, operations, and hiring processes support archive staff in building sustainable community relationships and implementing respectful professional practices. So this objective is focused on changing the organizational culture within the archival institutions. Next slide, please. So there are 4 strategies that we identified in this objective. And these strategies are about bringing Indigenous people and perspectives into the operation of an archival institution. It's about ensuring that Indigenous people and communities are part of the decision-making process in a meaningful way, and not just as invited guests, but as partners and colleagues. Not just acknowledging, but centering the values and priorities of Indigenous communities in the management of archival materials that are by and or about them, so that these considerations become embedded in decision-making processes by default and are not an aside or an afterthought. We also need to recognize that many archival institutions operate on a shoestring budget and are reliant on short-term grants and volunteer or part-time labor. This is the reality of our profession. We're chronically under-resourced and underfunded. So staff may want to engage in this work, but they may not have the staff time or the resources to support it properly. So these strategies will help build collaborative relationships with Indigenous communities where both the community and the archives can benefit and can work together to try to overcome some of those challenges. And so that's objectives 1 and 2, and I will pass it on now for objective 3.
Thanks, Jennifer. Next is Krista McCracken.
Thanks, Jennifer and Erica. So the third objective is really looking at professional practice within the archival community. And it reads, the Canadian archival community shall build a body of professional practice that is committed to decolonization and reconciliation. Archive staff must be equipped with knowledge and skills to foster relationships, contextualize and critically assess archival materials, recognize barriers that exist, and privilege Indigenous methods of creating, transmitting, and preserving knowledge when working with Indigenous related archival materials. So this is really looking at what archivists and archival staff are bringing into the archives and that professional practice piece that is around professional development. Erica, can you, next slide? And so some of the ways that this can be implemented or strategies really around understanding and acknowledging the colonial roots of archival practice, theory, and policies. This is something Jennifer mentioned that was in one of the earlier objectives as well. And it's kind of a theme throughout the framework as a whole, that really need to critically look at our profession and understand the roots of it and think about ways that it can be dismantled or changed. Additionally, archivists need to be provided training and support for trauma-informed archival practice. And this is part of an ongoing learning journey, I think, for many of us who are just beginning to understand what it means to work in a trauma-informed way and work with Indigenous communities, specifically in a trauma-informed way. Likewise, archivists need to engage in public education and advocacy. It's not enough just to educate ourselves. We need to use our privilege, our resources to educate the general public as well. Next slide. Additionally, other strategies that were identified under professional practice is the need to support networking and communication and collaboration. There's no point in us working in silos on this work. It's going to take a lot of us working together collaboratively to make change within the archival profession. And so that networking and communication piece is really key. Lastly, it is really important that we support professional engagement by Indigenous professionals. And this needs to be on their terms. That could be engagement in conferences, it could be engagement in professional development, it could be engagement in formal education. But it's not the settler archival community that needs to decide what that engagement looks like. We can create space, we can provide funding for it, but the Indigenous community needs to decide what that looks like. Next slide. So objective 4 looks at ownership, control, and possession of archival materials, also known as OCAP. The Canadian archival community shall recognize and respect Indigenous peoples' intellectual sovereignty over archival materials created by or about them. Next slide. So the strategies for this section is really looking at archival practices that relate to ownership, control, access, and possession. We need to understand the intricacies of those and think deeply about them. So that means thinking about how do we actually get these materials in the archives, revisiting acquisition histories. were they donated by settler communities that extracted material from Indigenous communities? What does that mean to hold those archives today? Is a settler archive the right place for those materials? And that actually leads into conversations around thinking about repatriation, both physical repatriation, digital repatriation that's really dictated by community. Because sometimes, the archives is not the right place for material. Some material was not meant to be preserved forever. And so really having those conversations with community is key. Next slide. And so part of this is really letting Indigenous communities lead conversations about possession and disposition. And that's understanding that archives, maybe have held this material for 100 years, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right thing. Having conversations with Indigenous communities about where that material should be held, how it should be accessed and used is really important, and who should own it. Lastly, collaboration on all of this is very key. It should not be a lone archivist in an archives making these decisions. It needs to be done collaboratively with the Indigenous community that is the creators of the records or who the records are about. Okay. And I think that's it for objectives 3 and 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. And next up, we have Donald Johnson.
Good afternoon. Objective 5, access, is related to Objective 4. Here we treat a practical aspect of control, that of access. There can be no access without the knowledge that records exist. So Objective 5, access, addresses the Indigenous people's right not only to know about the records, about them, but also the control of access to those records. Next slide. Identification of record by or about Indigenous peoples should be conducted with the relevant communities and organizations. And as in the development of finding aids and taxonomies, outreach and communication with the represented Indigenous communities and peoples will guide that identification for both the archives and for those represented in the archival record. As materials are identified, this information collected in databases, whatever form they may take, can be made available as navigation guides and finding aids. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in our next objective. Within Canada, there actually already are many online archival information networks. So that infrastructure that enables this identification and sharing is actually already in place. Next slide, please. During appraisal, selection, and processing, culturally appropriate access protocols are identified, and by means of involving members of those represented in the collection. This is probably not too foreign from the appraisal and processing that occurs with records of other communities. In addition to protocols and policies, actual access needs to be considered. So, for example, operating hours for both in-person and online should be set to better serve Indigenous researchers, as well as staffing and resources could also be adapted. Some communities may not have the infrastructure or bandwidth needed for the research. So as for all researchers, archival materials need to be made available in various media and by means suitable for the researcher's needs. Next slide, please. There are barriers to access. Now, those barriers are greater for Indigenous communities and individuals. Archives must support the removal of those barriers, whether by lobbying, advocacy, or collaboration. And those may be of a formal nature or an informal nature, depending on your jurisdiction or your environment. I think advocacy maybe is something as simple as speaking up for someone. Access can also be improved by building community archives. And I think as Krista mentioned, repatriation of materials in its many forms, digitization of archival records, development of infrastructure, transcription, which has some issues related to it, as well as a number of other improvements. Material reproduction costs may also be a barrier to access, though reductions in the cost of materials have to be balanced against the revenues of reproductions, which is definitely an issue for smaller archives. So, next objective, next slide, please. Objective 6 speaks to arrangement and description. Archival arrangement and description, as practiced in Canada, is based on a Eurocentric worldview. Canada's archival community must recognize that multiple narratives and worldviews exist. So arrangement and description must be enriched to reflect the varied cultures, languages, histories, and knowledge systems of the Indigenous peoples represented in archival collections. Next slide, please. During processing, when records are arranged and described, Indigenous communities must be involved to ensure accurate contextualization within their own knowledge systems, as well as maintaining their contextualization within the described system. So, question, how do Indigenous researchers use or need to use archival materials? One example might be reference interviews and inquiries can be used to inform that archival description. There may be purposes, research and archival access that can be better promoted through changes in that description. Many archival databases support non-Roman orthographies, and that's especially true here in Canada. So description can be prepared in the appropriate orthography as well. Place name authority databases have been developed and actually are under development still, which can be used to create and revise to produce more accurate descriptions. I think there's a number of good examples. I think if we have a look at our bibliography within the framework, you'll see some examples of those. Next slide. And many archival databases also permit alternate and parallel titles and notes. This is one means of recontextualizing descriptions so that they can respectfully represent those records. Difficult. Racist terminology should not be deleted. Its retention demonstrates a conscious effort to decolonize. But as with other materials which may cause offense, disclaimers and notices will warn researchers of potentially harmful information. Transcriptions of descriptions in the original language will enrich the description and capture more of the creating context. Next slide. While archival databases have means to support alternate and parallel descriptions, additional development is needed to provide search and display records with a holistic perspective. The structures again are based on that Eurocentric view, and some of the mechanisms that we have for searching and displaying may not be able to adequately represent those records. Many archives do allow researchers to suggest changes to descriptions. So here the researcher could be informed that changes could be made not just to correct a description, but also to better represent an Indigenous perspective. As mentioned in Objective 5, there are archival information networks that improve access to materials. And these same networks can and do link descriptions between archival institutions. And I think we can go a step further that information by and about Indigenous peoples is found in other GLAM institutions. So archives should also be collaborating with galleries, libraries, and museums and heritage organizations, there's heritage societies, a number of other groups. Next slide. In Canada, the Archival Descriptive Standard RAD should be revised to recognize the cultural diversity of Indigenous peoples. Individual authorship is the basis of most archival arrangement structures. This foundation should be reassessed considering authorship of Indigenous communities and cultures. So essentially a non-individual author. Archival communities around the world are working towards improved archival arrangement description, which better represents Indigenous peoples in archival collections. This objective builds on that work with the goal of enriched, accurate, and respectful arrangement and description. Thanks.
Thank you, Donald. And next we have Reagan.
Hi. So objective number 7 is around education. So the Canadian Archival Education Program shall integrate Indigenous research, theory, history, methodologies, and pedagogical practices into current and future curricula. So there is various, next slide. There is various different ways that we're focusing on that within this. And one of them is recruitment of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis archivists, record keepers, and heritage professionals to teach archival education programs. It's also about develop a variety perspectives. So developing interdisciplinary curricula that integrates a variety of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis perspectives, knowledge systems, and values within all of the programs. Next slide, please. It is also, this one just talks a little bit more specifically about that. So the curricula needs to include, but not limited to, the use of archival materials to support treaty negotiations, language or cultural development, genealogy and kinship research, land claims, business development, climate change, as well as environmental monitoring. It can also include relations with the government of Canada or provincial governments, mental well-being and harm reduction techniques to mitigate negative emotional and physiological effects of archival staff and visitors and researchers with archival material related to traumatic events. Indigenous focused classification systems, which have been seen in libraries such as the Brian Deere classification system, which provide a more flexible and cultural appropriate approach to organizing First Nations, Inuit, and Métis documentary resources, should also be a part of this training. Next slide, please. Support is going to be key, of course, as part of any educational changes. This includes developing student support services and educational models that acknowledge a variety of needs and priorities and values of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis students. We need to be cognizant of the flexible schedules as well as flexibility in terms of the subject matter which is being discussed when dealing with a variety of different groups from different places and different topics. And that also includes flexibility with the type of students or practitioners that you're working with. So youth, elders, or sorry, I just lost my train of thought. This includes both youth and elders. And expanding delivery options within that flexibility. So is this all on site? Is it remote? Is it on-site learning in communities? And looking at different ways that this can make access to education more flexible as well. So those are the main priorities for education, and that is kind of the end, other than the outreach. Outreach is obviously a part of every different priority, but engaging Indigenous students, working collaboratively with them, and developing partnerships both for the development of curricula, but also for the implementation of curricula within the educational settings is going to be paramount. And next slide. Delivery. And like I mentioned previously, the alternative learning options and platforms, partnerships with different communities, and equitable access must be at the forefront when we're talking about education programming. Equitable access, like we talked about earlier, in terms of access to internet, having online learning isn't an option for everyone. And so just assuming that we can just put everything online and everyone can access it is not a real actual solution. Working in partnership with communities, we'll be able to figure out what works best for each individual community without making assumptions that a one-size-fits-all approach will work for each community that we are working with. In conclusion, we have a lot of work that has already been done, but of course, this is only really the start for most of us within the archival profession. There is, of course, many different groups that are a part of the Canadian Archival Task Force that are represented on this task force even. The Association of Canadian Archivists has taken this framework and has created the Indigenous Matters Working Group, which will look to take the recommendations here and make recommendations to ACA. They'll also be working to do an no, we're not saying updated, we're saying a new version of an Aboriginal archives. Folks will know it as the Aboriginal Archives guide. Our new one does not have a title yet. We're not calling it a new edition. We're just calling it a new document that will look to support communities who are looking to create archival spaces within their space for whatever reason, be it for working on land claims or for cultural reasons. There's a lot of other work that's being done with CCA, the Canadian Council of Archives, including creating a database of Indigenous related material and repositories, and of course, working to establish support networks, because the reality is that we are all going to have to work on this material together. This is not going to be something that just a few of us work on in our individual institutions. It has to be a profession that it has to be at a professional level. And we do need to make sure that we're not spending our time in silos, reinventing the wheel, each and every one of us. So communication about how we are working, what is working, what importantly is not working, is going to be key so that we are all able to push this forward and it does not sit on our desks. But there's some practical things that, of course, are being done right away, including calling for endorsements of this guide itself. So the task force is working to collect the names of individual repositories or groups that are endorsing this framework. We will, I'm not sure that we have quite figured out how we'll be collecting those names, but if your organization has in fact done an endorsement, please let us know. We will be collecting those names so that we can add them to the list. We're hoping that showing this collective support will allow for other organizations who might be more hesitant to see that there is support behind it and that embracing the framework is the right thing to do and will allow the archivists on staff, the record keepers and knowledge workers to be able to do the work that needs to be done. And I believe that is everything. So thank you very much. And we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Reagan. I just wanted to put a shout out to Reagan, who is joining us after just being incredibly sick. So thank you. And as she said, that does conclude our formal presentation. And so my colleagues and I invite you to share your questions or comments, however you feel comfortable.
Yes, and I think so. We have a Google Doc if folks would like to ask questions anonymously. That Lotus Norn-Whistler just posted in the chat. You can also post your questions in the chat, and you can also raise your hand or use some other Zoom reaction to let us know you'd like to speak. And of course, if you feel comfortable and have the capacity or wish to, we invite you to turn your cameras on for this portion of the discussion. So we can start right away with Jonathan's question. Jonathan, do you want to unmute yourself and ask it?
Sure, can you hear me? Perfect. I was just asking if the Association of Canadian Archivists, formally as the organization, is going to produce some form of an endorsement of this document. Of course, you know, our history in the United States with the protocols and endorsement for that document. So I was just curious if the association was needing to or looking to make that kind of endorsement.
Hi, Jonathan. Nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too. Thanks so much.
You look very warm. It looks lovely behind you.
It's very nice.
Yes, actually, the board has recently moved to accept this, the reconciliation framework. So it is formally endorsed, and that was the basis or the motivation for establishing the Indigenous Matters Working Group, because the working group will then take the framework and go forward with it and reassess the ACA services and membership offerings, I guess, membership models, like everything about the ACA will be reassessed in light of the framework to identify barriers or ways we can improve areas for partnership and so on. So yes, they have.
Thank you so much.
I'll just add to that, with my hat of being the co-chair of the Indigenous Matters Working Group. We're also going to be the ones that are looking specifically at this new guide for Aboriginal archives, or not the Aboriginal, sorry, the Aboriginal, a replacement for the Aboriginal guide, archives guide. The document itself doesn't quite match with what we've been working with. It was last updated in 2003. So just looking at the Google Doc, I know that that was one of the questions that came up. So that will be an ACA document that will be created and will be worked on over the next year. We've already started kind of putting together what we want in that document. And then that will be a new kind of resource for folks either working in Indigenous community archives or Indigenous community members who are looking to start archival collections.
Evan.
Hi, my name's Evan Schilling. I'm a librarian at the University of Waterloo. I'm not an archivist, but I came to this session because I'm doing a project for my library that may touch on truth and reconciliation. So I have two questions. Can you speak to how much involvement you had in putting this document together with Indigenous identified archivists themselves? The reason I asked this, and I'm worried, you know, about the buy-in, right? Like, who was involved in putting this together and all that, and you know, if you know, if the profession is not missing something. And then the second question I had was, you mentioned, you know, involving Indigenous communities when you're describing their collected works. How do you envision reciprocity to look like? Because I'm, again, also worried about when trust is low, because I think a lot of Indigenous communities right now, trust is low with many Canadian organizations. Are you looking into maybe a pay structure? Because again, people should be reciprocated for Indigenous knowledge. So thank you.
Who wants to, anyone want to jump in, or shall I?
Well, I can actually speak at least that first one. I am Indigenous. And I know that there was a sincere effort to bring into the task force Indigenous members, and I think, and it wasn't taken lightly. And I think maybe answering to that second one, I think even acknowledgement or the respect that earned from my participation, I think is a trust building activity. So, and I don't know, probably more on the second question, Erica.
Sure. That's a totally legitimate point, Evan. Thank you for bringing it up. Yes, so we have received some criticism for not having more Indigenous members on our task force, or conducting more interviews than we already had conducted with Indigenous communities and members thereof. The thing about it is that first of all, we did reach out to as many people as possible with regards to gaining membership, and also with regards to conducting interviews and establishing relationships and whatnot. What we learned, however, through this process is that, as you pointed out, there is limited trust. That is our landscape right now, is limited trust. And what that requires is extended period of relationship building. And that's what we focus on in our framework, is that this, if nothing else, if you get the idea that relationship building is key, that's the good message from our framework. Trust is not going to be rectified or built overnight. And so we are very, if you look at the appendices that we provide in terms of the research that we did, we are very honest with where we lacked data, if you want to call it that, where we lacked engagement. And, you know, we propose not solutions, but reasons for that. Like with the Métis community, for example, it was extremely difficult to gain and retain Métis members. It was extremely difficult to obtain interviews with Métis professionals. And this had to do with lack of trust. So unfortunately for us, because we had a finite timeline, I mean, you know, I don't want to make it an excuse, but to be fair, like, we are all volunteers, we are all doing this work kind of off the side of our desks. None of us were paid to do this work. We did get SSHRC grant monies to support our outreach and our events, but not to compensate the members per se. So this is like volunteer work, okay? And as it was, we put in, you know, like I put in 6+ years into this work. Many of my members put in 4 years. Like, this is a big commitment. Establishing that trust relationship is going to take concerted time. And so, you know, in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, like, you know, these are the archives that we're kind of speaking to in saying that there is deep distrust in the Métis community towards archives. If you have materials that pertain to Métis peoples, you need to begin this relationship building process, because you need to, you know, develop that relationship, start those dialogues, so that, you know, as we just mentioned in all of our objectives, you know, we have to let people know what materials archives have. We have to start talking about access protocols. We have to start thinking about, you know, repatriation. We have all of these things that we need to touch on. But it's really incumbent upon the archives that hold that information to kind of do that work. But, you know, Evan, please, you know, I hear you. I hear you. Jennifer.
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add on to that, so I myself, I am not Indigenous, but I work in an Indigenous community, and I have for the last 11 years. And beyond the lack of trust, is, as Erica was talking about, is very real, but there's also the number of people who work for and with Indigenous communities in an archival capacity, that pool is quite small. And the number of those people who are Indigenous is much smaller still. And so those people, and even myself as a non-Indigenous person who works in an Indigenous community, I get asked to participate in a lot of stuff because, and I see the same people at like all the conferences, all of the workshops, all of the, doing the presentations, it's all the same, group of, 6 or 7 of us. We see each other all the time because just the pool of people is really small. And so those people end up getting asked to do this work a lot and don't always have the capacity to say yes to everything. So I think it's also important to acknowledge that there is that it's going to take time to build a bigger pool of people who have not just the knowledge, but the capacity and capacity in terms of time and the comfort level to take on doing this work and that, so that that's going to take some time as well. And also to your question about the what reciprocity looks like. So for every community, that's going to look a little different. And I think that the main thing that individual archivists or librarians or individual institutions, the biggest thing you can do is ask that question: what can we do for you? Like, okay, what can we do to help? Like, what kind of reciprocity would you like to do? And maybe that is financial honorarium. That's fairly common in a lot of Indigenous communities, that people are given cash honorariums and to compensate them for their time. And if you can afford to do that, that's great. But maybe it's something else. Maybe they want something else. Maybe there's a project you can help them with or something. Like there are in every community there can be different things, but asking the question is really the way to get to that. And asking the question also shows that you're willing, like the willingness, and shows that the understanding that that this is something that there is, that relationship has to be built on reciprocity. And it goes to, and it helps to build that trusting relationship if they know that you understand, even if you don't know the answer, that that you need to ask the question. So
I'm wondering if we can hop to, I've got 2 related questions in our Google Doc about speaking of kind of reciprocity and sort of relationship building and also siloing, what we can do in the American context, both to sort of bolster your work, think about how the framework might be leveraged here on the protocols, which were created in 2006, or how you might suggest, we might apply or endorse in some way the framework, or, otherwise support your work.
Somebody like to, I don't want to monopolize talking here, so please, if others want to. Krista, Reagan, any thoughts?
I can. So I think that endorsement from any side, I don't think that a border of Canada and the US is necessarily indicative of the communities that we are serving. There are communities, of course, that span both. So I think that any endorsement that comes from the US is, of course, just supporting it as well. But just thinking about how the framework might be used or implemented in the States, I think it's important to look at objective number 1, which is relationships or respects, relevancy, reciprocity, and responsibility. I can't speak today. Apologies. I think that looking at that as where we start, a lot of our work is really important. And I think that that's a really easy way that we can start talking about this within our organizations, within our institutions, to get the conversation started and to, really move the work that needs to be done either with the American protocols or with this framework, because it's about how we're approaching these relationships and the relationships that we are building, that we're going to be able to do this work. Nothing can be done without the Indigenous communities that we're working with. Kind of tacking on to one of the questions that I already see in the Google Doc about like what we identify as about an Indigenous community. Like we've had a lot of conversations about this as we work through the framework, but many of us hold records of people who have worked in Indigenous communities, about missionaries or other religious folks who have set up residential schools or industrial schools, government workers, health records from people who have gone into communities to do work. Personally, my PhD is focusing on anthropology and the anthropologists who have created records that communities have now taken back and are redescribing for themselves. So I think that you can specify it any way that you like. I think it's going to be different for every community about how they see themselves represented in the records. And it's about working with the community to see and know if, you can say these are the records we have. We're going to work on a relationship with you based on, this framework. And we want you to know that these records are here. But yeah, it all has to start with how we're building those relationships.
Thanks, Reagan. I'll just add it also comes down to community priorities, right? So what the community's interests, where they lie at the moment. So that will reflect back onto what an archives hold. So I don't have any, materials pertaining to religious orders or health records per se, but I might have records pertaining to land use or, application for development, say. So if a First Nation, if a community is interested in understanding better how their territory has been developed over years, or what industrial, say, waste might be still remaining over years, then they, that information pertains to that community, right? It's their land. I mean, we all live on non-European land. So, if you look at it that way, then any sort of development is pertaining to an Indigenous community or communities. So it really depends on, in my opinion, on what the priorities are of those communities upon which you sit and hold records about, if that makes sense.
And sometimes you won't even know, or the community won't even know. There can be unexpected. Sometimes these records contain information that are snippets of a history that has been lost to people, right? So even if it's information that is about one specific person, that can be a connection to an ancestor that has been lost to a family. There can be pieces of information about. So one example here that came up a while back is the census records. The older census records have anglicized versions of people's Indigenous names. And in Tawasan culture, and I'm sure in many Indigenous communities, there are traditions of handing down names through families. People no longer remember who the names, or may not remember exactly what the name was. They may not. And so, or who had the name, so the census records can provide that connection and can help to reestablish that cultural practice by being able to say, oh, this person had, your great grandfather had this name, or your great grandmother had that name. And so even these things that don't seem like they are irrelevant can have a deep meaning and provide a connection to a lost history for a family, maybe for a whole community, but even just for a family, a family, it can provide a window into a history that's been lost to them. And so it's important to remember that it doesn't necessarily have to be grand troves of knowledge. It can be little snippets of information that can be just as valuable.
I've just posted another question from the Google Doc about the protocols being sort of set up in this, action items for, PWI institutions and archivists, and action items for communities. And was that ever considered as an approach, or how are you sort of seeing the breakdown, I guess, of the roles of who's doing what in kind of building this reciprocity?
So the call to action is the basis for this framework. And the call to action was made to the non-Indigenous archival community of Canada. And so the reconciliation framework is geared toward that community, because that community is the one that has the work to do. We need to acknowledge what has been done. We need to do the heavy lifting on this work. So there are no, recommendations or suggestions per se to Indigenous communities, right? It's for the non-Indigenous folks. And so, there's tremendous work that has been done in the past. Native American protocols. There was also the work out of Australia, New Zealand. Tremendous work, and each is valuable in its own way. We were responding to the call to action in a Canadian context, and so while we did look at other, work, it just wasn't applicable to our context, right? Like to our call to action, to what we were trying to do, it didn't fit. So we did look at them. They did inform our work, but we chose to go in this particular way.
I'll keep going from the Google Doc unless I see a hand or another chat question. So the next from the Google Doc is about repatriation. So in the outreach interviews appendix, and also Donald, you mentioned repatriation and noted how archives legislation doesn't align with needs and interests of Indigenous communities. So what steps do you foresee kind of needing to be taken on that front? What barriers do you foresee? And I know this is something we're starting to work on here at SAA, and so we're very eager to hear what we might sort of model after in your context.
Yeah, I guess, and I think, as was mentioned, repatriation could take many forms. We have many records, if they're digitized, even just for access. It's something that essentially bringing those records to the community where they can actually be used or relearned from is certainly one aspect. And there's precedent in other domains, if you will, on repatriation, especially within the institutions of the museum. They're artifacts, but I think there's if you have a look at the agreements and the relationship that has been built there that has allowed for that repatriation, I think that's one of the things that we can appeal to, and also being cognizant of the fact that some materials may not, as was mentioned, may not be things that were intended to be kept. You think about an oral history, essentially it's something that might evolve. So actually fixing it as a record may not be in line with the perspective on how that should be used. Priorities, capacity, a number of things like that. Education, essentially, for repatriation to be successful, I think there has to be someone within the community that can care for it in the manner in which they were they would have normally done. But if without education and resources, that may not be possible. So it's a bit of a chicken egg problem, but I think a lot of the strategies that we've proposed, I think will bring us closer to the possibility of repatriation.
So repatriation is one of those things that is one option, right? I mean, there's other options as well, such as determining access protocols, such as determining, collaborative management of the archival material as well. Depending on the archives that you work in, like for me, example, because I work in an academic archives setting, it's much easier for me to deaccession and transfer material. That's not a problem. For Donald, that might be a little bit difficult because he's in a provincial archives and he has he's got, an act that, enables their collection. He has legislation, that he has to abide by. There are many other, hoops that he would have to go through, but that doesn't mean that it still couldn't be, that relationships can't be established to manage the information that they hold in a better way. Right. So I guess it's just a question of going through the framework overall and seeing what you can do. What feasibly can you do? What little pieces can you enact? Instead of looking at all the like, you need to identify the barriers. That's fine. Like with Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan, the legislation is a barrier. But barring that, what can be done? Right? Because something can always be done. You can always be creative in how you approach things. I mean, these are relationships, right? They can take myriad shapes and forms. These, we can build whatever we need to get something done. So it is not impossible, but just to say that repatriation is just one kind of avenue as well.
The idea of doing what you can to get something done, I think, is really a conversation that we've been having a lot. How, looking at the framework as a whole can seem really daunting. But the idea that there's actionable things inside the framework that are applicable to anybody, regardless of your budget or priorities, you can find something in there that you can do. And I actually think that's how one of the ways the framework can work really well with the protocols is that there's actionable items within the framework that align with the messaging of the protocols that might be able to, US organizations might be able to use.
A good reminder too, that the framework, its endorsement doesn't imply that you will adopt and employ all of those strategies. Some organizations may be able to perform one or two of them. Small steps are all good. So just a reminder that it is a smorgasbord. You can pick and choose depending on the needs of your communities, needs of your archives, etc. So.
I'm hoping that this is a little bit of a softball question for you all from the Google Doc, but what is 2026 in reference to on the website?
That's so strange, isn't it? I don't really understand that. I honestly think it was just a URL that was chosen. It's, as far as I know, it doesn't pertain to anything. So great question. Sorry, I don't have a better answer.
By 2026, we'll have all of this figured out. We'll have it settled. What other questions do folks have? I think we answered the last question in the Google Doc earlier. Oh, someone said, how do we endorse? What is there a official process?
We haven't actually figured that out yet. We've seen other, living documents call for endorsements. They've, maybe issued a formal letter that people can sign. We haven't gotten that far yet. I think, at least from my personal perspective, the idea of endorsement is great, and if it has value within your institutional context, then I think that's fabulous to do. I would rather have people, you know, dissect the framework and see what they can do within it, as opposed to fuss about an endorsement, if you know what I mean. That being said, there is value, there can be value within a administrative context to be able to show, you know, the upper echelon of management that, oh, okay, these organizations have formally endorsed this work. We would like to as well. And with that, we would like a commitment of resources. So whether that's time of people, whether that's funding, whether that's, you know, incorporating priorities into a work plan, whatever that might be. So if that is helpful for folks, I think that's great. And that's kind of why we're thinking more along the lines that endorsement might be a good thing. But we will let you know when we have something formal, just for that, just to help those folks. So.
But your own organization may have its own way of endorsing something. So
Yeah.
like that there may be procedures for, you know, a resolution of the board or whatever, depending on the institution. So if your institution has its own way of doing that, then please, by all means, use that.
And that's what the ACA did, right? Like we moved a formal board motion. I didn't propose it. I had, you know, somebody else propose it because it was just too many hats at once. But it was discussed and it was put forward, and then it was incorporated into like a work plan, right, after that board motion. So excellent point, Jennifer.
I think we've gotten through our Google Doc. I don't see any hands, but I would like to encourage everyone in the room to be brave since we have very few minutes left.
I'm seeing a hand up for Peter Schmid, I think. Maybe.
Peter. Oh, no pressure, Peter.
Oh, I see a reply here in the chat that the 2026 was a response to the next 10 years thing that the SCCA published. So there you go. Thank you, Alana. The mystery is solved. I appreciate that. So if there's no more questions, I mean, please feel free to connect with us at any other point. We are always open to discussing shop, I guess you could say, whether with a group of you or individual, you know, don't be shy. We're here to talk about it. We've kind of committed to this for a while now, and it's gonna, you know, we're here to back it up.
And congratulations on a really kind of epic amount of work. The appendices are pretty astounding. Just the amount of sort of labor and effort and goodwill that went into this is really apparent. So we're all really grateful to see your work and have more kind of fodder for our own discussions and ways that we can support you.
Well, we would love to hear what actions you take in the States based on the framework. That would be really interesting for us.
I hear a call to action.
You bet.
Okay, well, we'll end it there. Thank you everyone so much for coming. We had at one point almost 120 people here. So that just speaks to the importance of this work and how much it resonates. So thank you so much, and I will stop the recording.